Welcome to episode 19 of A Gamer Looks at 40. One away from 20. Amazing. I wish I could say I didn't think this would ever happen, but I really figured this would happen. But I'm glad we got here, and thanks to you for helping propel this journey. And throughout this journey, while I've been on it, I've gotten the chance to meet a lot of really interesting people. People from bloggers, streamers, YouTubers, everyday people telling their stories and sharing those stories with us and trusting me with those personal tales. I do appreciate all of that. But one of those people is Brian, also known as Spacies on Twitter. He's a prominent YouTuber, excellent Twitch streamer, Twitter entertainer, and he's been doing this for years, and he's been doing this very well. But before that, he had a fascinating job, working at the Sega Hotline. Remember the 1-900 number your parents would never let you call, no matter how stuck on Alex Kidd or Sonic 2 you were? Brian was one of the people on the other end of that line. And from his chair, he had an inside seat to one of the most exciting times in Sega's history. And we're not going to be, I don't want to oversell it. All right. We won't be sharing stories of hanging out with game developers or being in the room when the Sega geniuses were conjuring up Sonic Tuesday. But this is a great representation of how it felt to be that environment during those chaotic and rapidly changing times. And at the end, it's just an awesome conversation. We spoke, we were scheduled for an hour. We spoke for 2. This is about half that conversation. The other half you'll hear in other episodes when we talk about Sega and Sonic. And he's just a funny guy and a really good, entertaining conversationalist. And I had a blast chatting with him a few weeks ago. So it's time to grab the cordless phone and hope mom doesn't look at the phone bill too hard, because we're dialing into life at the Sega Hotline with Spacies.
Yo, we're busy at the moment. Maybe we're playing some of the new games that have just arrived. But hang on, we'll be with you as soon as possible.
I'd love to first kind of start off with your introduction, kind of your first touch points to video games in general. Kind of how old were you when you were introduced? What were you introduced to? Kind of start from there.
It involved a Space Invaders cabinet, a milk bar, and a milk crate. And I was only about 5. And you're probably thinking, what's a milk bar? So a lot of Sydney-siders now don't even know what a milk bar is anymore. It was a very 70s, 80s thing. It was a place basically where you would go to buy milkshakes or just local groceries, that sort of thing, like bread, milk, whatever. And there was one milk bar just meters away from where I lived, and I think I was 4. I don't know the exact details. We didn't record anything back then, not like now.
Right.
And I walked into the milk bar and I see this cabinet and I remember being absolutely terrified of the artwork on the side. It looked cool, scary. I'm talking about the Space Invader alien itself.
Okay.
It's a very striking image that even to this day I think still looks cool. And I didn't know what was happening. I didn't know what this machine was for. We had pinball machines, but we didn't really have arcade machines around. So I just remember hearing sounds, and I remember seeing people walking up to it, and I wanted to know what was in it. So I pushed the milk crate up to it and stood up on the milk crate and looked in. And I didn't realize that you could actually control it until someone gave me a 20-cent coin. Yes, they're not quarters here. They're platypuses. I put that 20-cent coin in and played my very first video game. And it wasn't a joystick. It was buttons.
Huh, really?
And yeah, so you had left, right buttons, and you had what do they call it, cannon or trigger? I've got to get the image of that later and find out. But it was anyway, you had left, right, and shoot. And my first critique as a gamer was I didn't like the buttons, but then they later re-released it with a joystick, and it was a lot easier to operate. But yeah, that was my introduction to video games. What a way to start, though, isn't it? Like Space Invaders of all machines.
Yes, yeah, it's crazy. And I love the fact that the arcade cabinet was one of the things that really attracted you to it. Because I think that's something that's so, especially in our age of digital, just the cover art of a game or the box art, or in that case, the cabinet art, is such a lost thing. They were so, yeah, you're right. I would go to an arcade and base what I would play sometimes based off of the cabinet. Like, oh, that's really cool. There's like a soldier on there. There's a helicopter on this one. You had an alien, and that's really fun that you're able to kind of get into it.
Yeah, I think if I was to do a top 10 arcade machines, like just based on artwork alone, Space Invaders would definitely be in that top 10 mix somewhere. It's just ridiculously iconic. There was two main different variants, but the one we got here in Australia was really cool. Space Invaders was huge in probably more ways here in Australia than most other countries. We actually had a single, and it got to number 3 on the charts for a song for Space Invaders. And I did a video on it, and I argue that it was one of the first video game merchandise ever released, and it's up there. It's very early, 1979.
Wow, a charting Space Invaders song. I need to look this up now. I need to find out where this thing lives.
It's called simply Space Invaders, and the band, well, it's not really a band, but the artist was called Player One. And again, iconic names. It was very pure times. They could get away with doing stuff like this back then because it was all new.
Yeah, no, definitely. That's actually really, really cool and really sweet. That's fun. I don't want to think it was a record label who saw a trend and was like, hey, come on, let's get some studio musicians and push out this single. But
no, I know, cool. I know the story. It was a bunch of guys they were in the record label, and they had a Space Invaders cabinet because it was a trendy thing to have in their office. And one night, the guy heard the sounds from the cabinet and thought, wouldn't that be good to have a song going over the top of that? And
cool.
and it went from one thing to another, and eventually went to Space Invaders, the single.
Through dark sunken night, I see another pale sunrise, surrounded by soldiers glued to the screens. Hold back the invaders, every kind of machines. We fight to survive, running to stay alive. Our bodies aching and tired, but there's nowhere to hide. Our cover's been blown away. Space invaders, 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 space invaders. They're closing in on me.
You have the arcade, of course, the home consoles come out. Obviously from everything you've been doing online, you're a big Sega fan. So was that the console you had initially, a Master System, or kind of how'd you get into the home world?
I remember wanting an Atari 2600. But my parents, I came from a very poor family. I didn't get gifted Ataris or Intellivisions or anything like that. So every time I'd go out to the shops, I'd see Ataris or consoles like that and be just like thinking, wow, wouldn't that be cool? Never ever got an Atari. Actually, to this day, I've never owned an Atari 2600. I just thought of that.
Wow.
One day. Like what, 40 years later, I'll get it. No, my first console was 1986. I wanted a Master System but couldn't quite afford it. But to the left of the Sega Master System was another console with a Sega logo on it, and I never heard of it. And it was called the Sega SC3000. Very marketable name, right?
Yes, rolls off the tongue, yes.
Exactly. But this thing was a keyboard. It was a computer. It was a microcomputer.
Huh. Okay.
And I thought, you know what? Master System's cool, but this thing's got a keyboard. I wonder what you can do with this thing. It was slashed to reduce to clear, $160. In 1986, that's a lot of money. The Master System was about 300 odd. So we're talking something that was half the price. There was a stack of games showing next to it being available, which showed me as a kid, well, there's a bunch of games for this thing. I might as well go down this path. So I bought that, and well, that just opened up a whole can of worms, didn't it? Because when I bought it, I was given the name of a distributor because this machine was not very widespread. And they said, you're going to have trouble finding games for it, but this guy will distribute the games from Japan. Get in contact with him and he'll help you out. That guy that I ended up getting the contact details for, he later helped me do my own Sega magazine later down the track, which I guess we'll talk about later.
Yeah.
But yeah, this one console, the SC3000, just opened up the world of Sega to me.
That's really fascinating. I love the fact that the answer to the where can I get games is go right to the distributor. Like there was no retail store. It was like, oh no, you gotta go to the guy who gets it.
He was a grey importer, not a distributor. Yeah,
I see. Okay.
The official distributors had bowed out by this stage, which is a company called John Sands. They used to do greeting cards. They're no longer in business, but they used to do greeting cards and board games. And I think they just looked at this video game thing that was coming out in 1983 and thought, let's give this a try. But by 1986, they decided that it wasn't the golden, the silver bullet for money, for profits that they thought it was going to be. Yeah.
Yeah, well, by then Nintendo was starting to take over the world, so it's
not
kind of hard
Australia.
for anybody to compete.
Not Australia.
I was going to ask that. Did Nintendo take over Australia, or did it ever, or when did it?
They had to wait a little longer because they had Mattel distributing the NES in Australia, and that the marketing that they were doing for the NES, if I was to give it a score out of 10, I'd give it a 1. It was absolutely terrible. There is a few commercials you can look up on YouTube, Aussie NES commercial, and it would just give you an indication as to how bad this thing was. But the weird thing is, I remember seeing Mario Brothers on the NES for the first time in a shop, and I just remember thinking that looks really cool. And but that was it. There was no 1-2 punch. It was just Mario Brothers, but there was nothing else that I saw on the NES for quite some time that made me go, yeah, that's the console I want. So, but meanwhile, on the other side of the coin, there was Sega, and arcades were huge in Australia. And then the Sega logo, you would see it everywhere, like just
right.
They were king of the arcades, and you wanted that experience in the house. And so here was a machine that could bring that to you. And they had games like Afterburner, Hang On, and all these other big games at the time. And I just thought, no, I want the arcade in my house. I don't want this NES thing. So it's funny how it was so different in the States.
It is very different. Yeah, and I have one of the earliest episodes of the show is a story of my best friend, who, when he was a kid, all he wanted to do was play Shinobi because he played it at the Pizza Hut in town. I love Shinobi.
I actually owned an Shinobi arcade machine at one time.
Dude, he would lose his mind. He would lose his mind to this day. And he asked his dad, I want to play Shinobi. So his dad goes to the store. What can I get to give my son Shinobi? And they're like, a Master System. Yeah. So to get him a Master System, and everybody else at school had an NES. Everybody. So he was like the Sega kid in the Nintendo world. It's a neat episode if you ever want to check it out, but it's one of the earliest ones for the show. But yeah, no, that's interesting how it was kind of flipped almost, because you're right. Sega was the arcade kings. When you went to the arcade, it was all Sega games. Nintendo didn't really have much of an arcade presence, really.
No, not at all. And in fact, I don't know if you're familiar with GameSack on YouTube, the gaming channel. Mm-hmm. Are you familiar with that one, GameSack?
No, I'm not actually.
So you've got, they used to have two hosts. One was very much pro Nintendo, and the other one was pro Sega. And this is an American channel. So when they asked the Sega guy, why did you get into Sega so hard? He had a very similar answer to mine, where he would go to the arcades and he would see the Sega logo, and that was his ticket into the world of Sega. Yeah.
Yeah, it's very, very interesting.
So, and this is a thing that I don't really see many people talking about, was that the two biggest rivals in gaming history, or two of the biggest, both released consoles on the same day. in the early 80s. And word has it that I've read somewhere that Sega could have released their consoles much earlier, but they were testing it and they probably were not sure of their product and probably got wind that Nintendo were releasing their console, so they just bit the bullet and released it. I'm not sure. Yeah. I would love to know that story.
Yeah, that'd be interesting. That'd be interesting because that didn't happen very often. Even like timed releases, it was just kind of they released it when they released it. And
well, even now, if PlayStation announces a release, the Xbox would be 2 weeks different. You know, it would be at least give each other a buffer.
Yeah, that's always like that's always kind of the push and pull of the new consoles. It's like, who's going to announce the release date first? Because the other's just waiting to find out. Yeah.
But again, in the 80s, and it wasn't till the early 90s, release dates weren't a thing. You just you would go into your game store or your toy store, and then you'll just check out what games were there. That's it. There was no, when's it coming out? When's it coming out? That just didn't happen.
Yeah, it just kind of appeared.
Yeah.
The only time you really got some of that was maybe in the 16-bit era towards the end. You'd get a little bit of that. But, yeah, you're right. In the 80s, that was just, because they were considered toys. These are just toys, and you treat them like toys. They weren't anything different than, a G.I. Joe or something like that. What would, if I gave you, I'm not sure, I'm sure you have a very good collection from what I understand. Correct me if I'm wrong, but you have a pretty cool collection of Sega stuff, and we'll talk a lot about that later. But if you had to start fresh with an arcade, right? You have a small area, and you had to put 3 arcade games in there first. What are the 3 arcade games you put in that space?
How much space have we got? Because that was the one thing about the Sega console, the cabinets, was they were huge. They were the first. I think that you would look at the Sega consoles as the arcade machines, as being the first that was not just a stand-up, cabinet that you would put a quarter in or a 20-cent coin in and play. They were trying to make their machines an event. So to answer that question, you'd have to start off with Outrun. The full cabinet that would move. I would want that.
Ooh, I remember that. Yeah. And the space you have is like a 2-car garage. That's your space.
Oh, okay. All right. We've got a bit of room to work with then.
You do.
So Outrun has to be an afterburner machine in there.
Yeah.
I'd be tempted to just go all out and get an R360. Are you familiar with an R360?
I don't. What is that?
Well, as the name implies, the actual cabinet spins in all directions. You get in this thing. You do not have lunch before you get in this thing. And
R360. I gotta look this up now.
R360. Google it. There is a gamer here in Australia who was the world record holder for the biggest gaming collection in the world. He had 2 of these.
What in the world is this? That's like a gyroscope. That's like something you'd put an astronaut in so they can
exactly.
practice.
It's like some sort of NASA experimental thing. There's a few videos I saw of kids in there going, Mom.
What in the world? Oh, this is great.
And apparently you would think it would be obvious, all right, put afterburner in that thing. But no, to my knowledge, I think there was mainly G-Lock, but there was, I think, a couple of these at Disneyland, and they may have had afterburner in it. I'm not entirely sure. It's an issue in its a topic in itself, that R360.
That's cool.
Yeah, so I'm getting greedy and going all out with the R360.
Do it. I said anyone. Yeah, you've carte blanche to throw 3 in there first. Yeah.
You would only.
Cool.
I think you would only use it once a week because otherwise you'd just get motion sickness.
Oh, man, that's crazy. How fun is that though? Huh.
And you got to look at when it was released. Like we're talking 90s. A piece of that. It just shows you that was Sega flexing. That was like when they were at their. That was when they were at their peak, and they still haven't been matched. I think to this day for arcade cabs.
That's cool. I mean, it's beautiful too. It's like a beautiful. I know
silver,
it's kind of
blue.
Like silver blue, kind of almost like a globe, but kind of like an.
There is a second version of it though, which is more modern Tron looking, and I didn't know about that until just recently. But the one, if you would ask me which cabinet I'd get, it would be the R360, the original one.
That's very cool. I know this is kind of like visual bit on the podcast, but definitely go home and look up the R360. It's neat. That's very cool. Now we can definitely transition into your time with Sega. Yeah, let's transition into that because I think that's actually fascinating. When were you a Sega employee and what were you doing there?
So leading up to me starting at Sega, I was just in high school writing my own magazine, the Sega Times. Mm-hmm. And by the way, you're probably going to hear me say Sega every now and again because that was how it was pronounced here in Australia. And I still, you look up any YouTube commercial from the 80s and 90s for Sega here in Australia, and that's how it was pronounced. So that's what I grew up with. Cool. But I had my own magazine called the Sega Times, and I would submit that to the Sega Hotline, and it was in the hope of getting a job. There's no two way, and also in hope of getting games sent to me to review, which ended up happening.
Cool. That's good.
Every now and again, I would get parcels land on my doorstep of random games to review, which was pretty cool. Like when I look back on it, a 16, 17-year-old just getting games sent to him by the video game company. Here you go, review this, write a little blurb about this game. And I wasn't always kind to the games. So my critic side of me didn't give Sega any sort of what do you call it?
Like special treatment?
Special treatment, yeah. So, like, I think the worst game I got was Cyber Shinobi for the Master System, and it is terrible. It was absolutely terrible, and I just ripped into it when I got that game sent out to me. I think they just sent it to me because it was not selling well.
Any sort of publicity on this thing would be lovely. Rip it apart. That's fine.
Yeah. But I would have to give the games back. That was one important aspect. I didn't get to keep them. No, couldn't get to keep them. Had to give them back. One day I had 4 Mega Drives sent to my house.
Whoa! By
mistake. So here I am. Just waking up early in the morning, and there was this parcel delivery knocking on my door with these boxes, and I'm like, "What the hell's this?" It wasn't like now. Everything's like you get everything shipped to your door now, but back then it was very rare to get anything delivered to your house.
Sure.
And so I open it up and I see these 4 Mega Drives. I'm like, "What the hell?" I don't remember ordering this. So I was faced with the dilemma: do I keep them? or do I be honest and ring him? And I was honest and I phoned him up and I said, "Yeah, look, I think there's a mistake here. I've got these 4 Mega Drives." They ended up collecting them and taking them back, and I think that's what contributed to me getting hired was that I showed that I was honest. So yeah.
No, honesty is kind of the best policy. I'm a dad, so try to teach the kiddo that honesty always wins in the end. You can trick me occasionally, but if you're just honest with me, then it'll work out better for you.
You know that lesson's never going to be. It's a lifetime lesson.
I know. No, I know. I know. Trust me. I know. I sometimes refer to my son as my treacherous son. I'm like that treacherous child has has done something.
He's going to be a politician.
Oh, please, no. No public service for you, son. Anything else?
So yeah, getting back to how I got the job, I was sending the magazines to Sega at the time. They had a manager there at the time who was kind of really chilled. Like, I kind of think he was a stoner. I'm not sure. So he just didn't follow up on getting me hired on to work there, despite the fact that I was showing him that I was the biggest Sega nut you'd ever seen. They probably get used to seeing that all the time, but I was actually demonstrating it by sending the magazines in an organized fashion rather than the random fan art that they would get sent in and that kind of thing. So I left high school, did my final test, and I was lounging around the house for about a month after leaving high school. And Dad comes into the room and gives me that speech. son, I think it's time that you actually went out now and started looking for a job. Ah, crap.
Yeah.
2 hours later, phone rings. It's a new manager from Sega asking me to come in for an interview. The timing on this was just perfect because
Wow.
I had all my chips banked on working at Sega. Everything was banked on working for that company, and I was not going to take anything else for an answer. And then all of a sudden the phone rings and I get asked to come in for the interview. And the interview was just simply, okay, so I hear that you've completed Alex Kidd in Miracle World. Yeah. Okay. And can you read? Yes, I can. And can you write? Yes. All right. You're hired.
Wow, that's amazing. What a cool story.
So it was mostly the fact that I had finished Alex Kidd and demonstrated that I could help out with assisting on that game, because later I'd find out that it would be every second freaking call that would come into the hotline asking for help for Alex Kidd and Miracle World, because it was the built-in game for the Master System and more importantly, the Master System 2.
Brian shares more stories from the call center after the break. Enjoy deep dives into gaming history? Then you should be listening to Level Zero Podcast, because they're back and cranking out quality episodes. Right now, they're embarking on a massive History of Sega series that will put my meager attempts at covering the company to shame. To shame, I say. Exhaustively researched, beautifully produced, and easy on the ears, Level Zero Podcast is a must-subscribe for fans of video game history. Check them out at Level Zero Pod on Twitter, Spotify, or wherever you find your favorite podcasts. Let's talk a little bit more about your time at Sega. You were working on the Hotline, sounds like.
Yeah, so
go
my
ahead.
first day working on the hotline, they said, okay, so you're basically going to get the phone calls come in. There is a computer here which you've got access to. Actually, no, we didn't have the computer at that time. It was all folders. So I got given a folder, and it was nothing fancy or formal like Nintendo had. They had jackets with the word Game Counselor written on it. I'd never heard of the term Game Counselor until the mid-2000s. So I did know I was a game counselor. We used to call ourselves Sega Masters. And the commercials used to say, call the Sega Masters now, and you can get through any part in the game. Serious fun. Serious fun was the I guess Nintendo had Now You're Playing with Power. Sega's slogan here in Australia was Sega Serious Fun. And it worked. It was I didn't know until later that there was another company that had the exact same expression. So there was that could have turned into a bit of a legal battle. But anyway, they said, okay, here's a folder. You'll find most of the questions that you commonly get asked in this folder, and you'll have to wing it otherwise. So good luck. It was lucky for me that my Master System knowledge was a little bit lacking at the time, but my Mega Drive knowledge, I was way on top of it because I had a machine that could pirate the games.
Really?
Yeah, it was called the Mega Disc Interceptor. And you could it's a great name. I actually love it.
It really is. It's great. I love it.
But okay, so they had a cool name, but then when you look at the box art, it had this weird generic bird on it. It was just a cartoon bird. I'm like, you had a great name, and then you had to just let it down with this really generic cartoon character.
That's funny.
But so the Mega Drive Mega Intercept. Oh my god, Mega Disc Interceptor. That's right. I've still got the box for it. Yeah, I've still got the box for it. And
cool.
There was a Super Nintendo adapter for it, so you could use the same thing that you whack on your Mega Drive, put the adapter on the Super Nintendo, use the same disc machine, and then copy Super Nintendo games as well. But the downside was that the Super Nintendo games were usually bigger than the Mega Drive games as far as memory goes. So I was very, very limited as to what games I could actually, copy. But yeah, I had a huge library of Mega Drive copied games because we figured out that you could use an Amiga to copy the discs, and that just blew the doors right open on like us copying, owning everything basically.
That's amazing. Huh.
I did a video on it. I'm surprised that
I know. I just looked up Mega Disc Interceptor, and you're the second result that came up.
I'm glad Google's doing its job.
It's doing its job. What the blazes is this thing? That's awesome. Look at this.
And because I use that title because when you look at it on top of a Mega Drive, it's there's no formal sort of markings on it, just my Sega sticker that I put on it, and it doesn't look like it should be on top of your Mega Drive, but yet it fits.
That's amazing. Very fun. That's amazing. I didn't even know that was it was even possible to like pirate stuff like that.
And interestingly enough, the guy that was my contact for the SC3000 was the one that put me onto this.
Oh wow, that's a nice guy.
So not only was he selling me games, he was selling me copied games as well.
Wow, that's interesting. How funny. That's cool. I had no idea that was even possible until just now. That's pretty great. So at your time at Sega, you were working the hotlines. Did you get a chance to do any writing or anything like that? Because that was how you kind of got your foot in the door, was with your magazine.
Yeah, so there was an in-house magazine for Aussie Soft called Megazone. It was originally called Megacomp. Sales were not that great for it, but when it became Megazone and then Aussie Soft took over it, Aussie Soft was the name of the company, by the way, that distributed the games in Australia. They later became Sega Aussie Soft because Sega bought them out. So I was officially working for not just Aussie Soft, but I was officially a Sega staff member at one moment in time.
That's cool.
And it is really cool when you go back and dig through just the scraps of memorabilia that I've got and seeing a memo sent to me with a Sega header on the top. It's pretty cool. But yeah, so they had this magazine called Megazone, which was basically a propaganda style magazine that would have reviews and previews and that sort of thing. I tried to be as open with my reviews and honest as possible. But given that it was an in-house magazine, there was one review that was changed or modified, and that was Sparts versus the Space Mutants. Mm-hmm. And it was for the Mega Drive, and I absolutely ripped into it because I just thought it was an absolutely shite game. It was terrible. And they changed one of my lines to, I suppose I'm being a little bit harsh with this game. Maybe if you can play it for a little bit, you'll get something out of it. And I remember reading that line going, there is no way in Hades that I would ever write something like that. I hate this game as much as I can. I just can't stand anything about this title. And yeah, that was the only time a review was modified. But it was good to be like every month you would get the editor come out and say, okay, I've got 5 games here. Who wants to do what game? And it would be like a major fight to see who can get the good games to review.
Yeah. Yeah, no, definitely. How would that resolve itself? Would it just be kind of whoever shouted the loudest, or how did that work out?
I generally kept getting the fighting games given to me.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
I'm not entirely sure why that was, but
Are you a big fighting game guy, or?
Well, it's funny when Street Fighter 2 first came out, I didn't really know much about it, and I just remember hearing everyone talking, oh, Street Fighter 2 this, Street Fighter 2 that, and I remember thinking, oh my God, I'm sick of hearing about this game already. But then I saw someone at the hotline bring in a Super Nintendo, and he brought in a very early version of Street Fighter 2, and it was then at that point that I was sold, like on that game. It was super slow by today's standards. Actually, have you ever played the original Street Fighter 2 on Super Nintendo?
I have. I owned it when I was a kid, but I've played it relatively recently. And you're right, it is like plodding through mud.
All
It's
right,
really slow. Yeah.
All right. So what you played? Imagine that's slower because the PAL version was slower.
No, really?
Yes. So
Get out of here.
That's
Oh,
like
God.
that's like Sonic. When Sonic came out, we thought it was super fast, And then we saw it being played on a Genesis for the first time. It was like, hang on, what's going on? Who pressed the fast forward button? Because the music's faster, the game is faster, everything about it is quicker. Then they never specifically modified it to run properly on the power system.
Interesting. So it would mess about with the I guess like the frame rate and such and the speed and whatnot.
Yeah, they
PAL versions, PALs, they refresh differently, right?
Exactly. They just, it was a very, when you think about it, one of their biggest releases in history was a very lazy and sloppy release because they didn't mod it for the market that it was intended for. That's actually pretty bad.
That's really
But
interesting.
they corrected it for Sonic 2. Sonic 2 ran at the correct speed on PAL and on NTSC as well.
Yeah, man, that's crazy. When during your time with Sega and at Sega, obviously that was in the midst of the Mega Drive times, which was, of course, they were against Super Nintendo and the console wars and all of that.
Oh, it was on.
Was it? I was gonna say, because was it as contentious and I want to say energetic as it sounds like from the different media that's been written about it, like Console Wars, the book, and all that?
It was full on. We would.
Was it? Okay.
Yeah, we would get calls from people just swearing allegiance to Sega, and
Wow.
it was hostile. I can only imagine what it was like being in a schoolyard. That if you had a Nintendo and everyone else was Sega, you'd just cop it big time from all the Sega bullies.
Wow.
We used to do road shows, so we'd have to go and show off the games in shopping complexes. It's what you guys call malls. Here in Australia, it was usually just called a shopping centre. We're slowly moving to a shopping mall. It's now getting called that here. But anyway, we had a stand of Sega stuff. You would basically just have 6 TVs set up with Mega Drives on them, and people can just go up and play them, and you'd be just in your Sega shirt answering questions, whatever.
Sure.
And there was one time where we did it, and across from our display, there was a Nintendo one as well. And so there was me and another guy running the Sega stand, and the Nintendo one was just one TV with this drop-dead gorgeous chick. Like blonde, blue eyes, blonde hair, and she was absolutely a stunner. And all I was caring about was, can I get a phone number? It didn't happen, but we were talking and we were just chatting away, and it was not hostile between the two companies. But I used to prank call Nintendo actually.
Get out of here.
From the Sega hotline, asking them just random stupid questions. And,
what would you ask them?
when is Sonic ever going to come out on Nintendo?
Oh, okay, yeah.
And which at that time was absolutely, sin to ask.
Yeah.
And
Wow.
I remember just trying to get to talk to one of the Nintendo staff members like a mate, like just to get a conversation going with them.
Sure.
But they were so stuck up and they were so professional that they just would not they wouldn't enter into that. And I would even say to them, you do realize I'm calling from the Sega hotline. Yeah, I know who you are. Click.
Wow. So they wouldn't even just
No.
banter it back and forth and just knock it back into wow.
And even to this day, we're trying to get a hold of ex-Nintendo hotline staff members. We just can't track them down. I'm sure that there's guys out there who used to work at the Nintendo hotline here in Australia who must be having, proud memories like I've got with Sega. And we just can't find them because we want to do a panel. And hang on, we want to do a PAX panel because we did do a PAX panel a couple of years back with just talking about what it was like to work at the hotline. But we want to do a PAX panel just, which was seriously what was the best console.
Yeah, man. Any other story before we get to that piece? Any other stories from working at the hotline?
I was actually, just before starting this, I was just going through. I was one of the very few people to bring in a camera to the hotline, and I managed to get just only a handful of photos. It was a very different era. We didn't go recording everything that happened. A lot of what happened in the 80s stayed in the 80s and the 90s. So, but I was looking through the photos and it was very messy. Not like now. If you were working for Sega in 2021, let's just say that there was a hotline now. The room would be tidied up for presentational because they would want to be able to have people come in and take photos, and that needed to be professional. Right. There was none of that in the 90s. It was just, it felt like a boys club. No, I wouldn't say boys club. There was girls working there. It just felt like a nerd hangout. It was just a gamers hangout. And I mean, I've got photos. Just about every photo of me working at the hotline is me wearing a Metallica shirt or just Adidas pants or something like that. So yeah, it was very. And I actually kind of regret that there was no official uniform because I would frame that now. I would. Oh
man, are you kidding me? If you had like a polo shirt or something. Although I can't imagine kids like in year 8 or at that era, putting on a Sega polo shirt and khakis. But even like a cool shirt or something. Yeah.
Sonic 2, I think, was the most just exciting time to be at a company like that. Mm-hmm. Having the manager for the hotline get everyone to get off the phones for a moment and have a quick impromptu meeting, and then hand everyone a pre-release version of Sonic 2. Ooh. Probably one of the biggest exciting memories of working there. The other cool thing was getting access to games before they were released. So we used to get EPROMs sent to us from Japan in big long plastic tubes. Yep. They were the chips that were needed to be put onto the board to run the game. So you didn't download anything. It was physically shipped out. And getting to look at Streets of Rage 2 before it was officially released. Man. And not only that, getting to take it home and play it at home. I remember having this ROM board in my backpack on going home, and there was kids at the back getting excited looking for an EGM magazine, which was huge at the time. Mm-hmm. And they were bragging about how they can't wait for Streets of Rage 2. And I did the one and only, like there was only 2 times I ever did the I work at Sega. I never did that because I just never got the opportunity to brag like that. Yeah. But this was the one time that I turned around and pulled out the board and said, guys, I work at Sega and this is actually Streets of Rage 2 right here. And their jaw dropped and they didn't know what I was talking about because who the hell knew what a ROM board was?
Like an EEPROM, right? Yeah.
And I said, guys, this is a prototype of what you're talking about there. It is awesome. And that's all I said. And that would have been, I'm sure they would have like remembered that too if they were big gamers.
That's funny. Wow. The kid walks up with a ROM of an unreleased game. That's really, really cool.
The only other I work at Sega moment I had was when the launch of Sonic 2, and I went to one of these, it was a serious fun store. It was a shop dedicated to Sega stuff. And they were showing off Sonic 2 a week out from its official release. And he would have been 8 or 9. He was playing through the game and he was stuck on this area. And I said, no, you got to go up there. And he's like, mate, how do you know? This game's not even out yet. I said, yeah, I know. I work at Sega. And he's like, oh, cool.
That's cool. That's really fun, man. I'm glad you had a chance to at least kind of a little bit of a flex. Nothing wrong with that.
Yeah, because you didn't have social media back then. It wasn't like now. Yeah.
It's right. Yeah, exactly. Any opportunity to for a good post, you take it, right? That's really funny, really cool. Before we say good night to the evening, Brian and I talk about boring video game merch, theme parks, and life after the Sega hotline.
There was a company here in Sydney at the time called Mambo who used to do really way out there funny shirts. And they did have one of their artists design a Sega shirt, which was basically a picture of this guy holding a Mega Drive controller and his head exploding. And it just had the word Sega on it, but it wasn't in the official font. It was in their interpretation of the font. And it was very surfy looking design and very cool looking, very vibrant 90s colors. Someone just recently reprinted that and sent me a 2021 version of that same shirt just recently. And that was a blast to see that shirt again, because I've long lost mine. However, when I was at PAX in 2017, this dude turned up to our panel and he was wearing that shirt. I'm like, oh my God, are you kidding? From, what's it been, 30 years? Just about.
Wow.
And he's still got the same shirt.
That's awesome. That's so good.
That is dedication. And it held up all right, actually, because I was expecting, oh man, if you got a shirt it's that old, it would have to be moth-eaten and falling apart.
Yeah.
It was
holes in it.
No, it was still wearable. Yeah.
That's neat.
Good
That's
quality
pretty awesome,
Sega merch.
That's funny. Yes. Well, actually, it's not really Sega merch. It sounded like it was like a
Mambo
knockoff. I can't imagine like Nintendo being okay with that. You know, like someone taking a design and doing something cool with it.
Well, it was officially endorsed by Sega. They were the ones that.
Oh, it was.
Yeah,
okay.
yeah. They were the ones that. I mean, if you fast forward to 2021, I've seen Xbox show their range of Xbox shirts. Can I just say that the Xbox range of modern shirts is just so boring? Like, ridiculously boring. I wouldn't buy any of it. It just looks so lame. Yeah, go Google it.
Generic.
Yeah, go Google it. Anyone that's watching, just go to the Xbox site and have a look at their merch. I'm not putting shade on Xbox, but I'm just saying in comparison to what Sega was doing back in the day,
Sure.
I just think we had way more interesting merchandise than what's available now.
And it seems like Sega at the time was really fighting. They were fighting and scrapping for relevance and and eventually dominance. And so I can imagine them being cool with like an artist putting together this really awesome shirt with a Sega logo. Cool, let's do it. Anything we can do to kind of push the brand forward and push the games forward.
Well, at that moment in time, Sega couldn't do anything wrong. We had news crews coming to our office quite often doing articles about how there was a recession on, because we keep forgetting that 91, 92 was pretty bad times financially for most people. But here I was working in a company that was just absolutely killing it. And they were also, just stuck with all this money, wondering what to do with it. So that's when they decided to open up a theme park eventually as well, because it was that big.
That's right. I remember there was a Sega theme park. Yeah.
Sega World. Yes.
Sega
at
World,
Darling
yeah.
Harbour.
That's it.
And
That's it. Yeah.
Didn't last long. 1997 to 2001, I think, from memory.
Oh, wow. Okay. So not a long run.
Not at all. And I only did go to it twice. Once I went in, that was for the actual test run. So I actually got to go in before it was officially opened.
That's cool.
And that was pretty cool. And it was weird seeing ex-staff members, because I was no longer working at the company at that time. And I'd get off the roller coaster and one of my ex-colleagues would be helping me get off. And I'm like, dude, what are you doing here?
It's like, hey, what's going on? That's pretty fun.
Yeah.
Cool.
But it didn't last long. And it's such a shame, because I don't think Sydney realized what they had, how special and how precious that was to have something like that on our shores.
Yeah, that's unique. That's a unique thing, and it's cool that it was there for a while, but it's a shame that it didn't last long. Unfortunately, I guess it's just like theme parks are tough. I guess. I mean, it seems almost kind of niche, but I don't know. I don't know how theme parks are in Australia and all, but Yeah,
Well,
it's interesting.
running a theme park is hard enough, but when you got
Right.
one that's so ahead of its time and it's
yeah.
all indoors, I'm sure there would have been parents
Oh.
out there going, we're not going to go to that thing. It looks boring. We can't see
Yeah.
anything. Because, a theme park, you drive past it, you see the big roller coaster, and that's the draw to go in, is that it's a massive park. But this was all encapsulated, is that the word? All indoors. Like, you couldn't see what was going on inside.
That's interesting. I didn't realize it was all inside. Huh. That
Yeah,
probably adds a lot to that. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, so it was a hard sell in that regard.
I'd love to kind of talk a bit more about, as we kind of move through your history with games and kind of how you've been, your history through games. Where did you go from there? Were you still, obviously you kind of, I guess you stayed on the Sega track in the 32-bit era and so the Dreamcast and the Saturn and all that?
Well, I went to work for a video game store, but that only really lasted for a year and a bit. And then after that, I couldn't stay in the industry. There just wasn't enough work on in Australia in video games.
Yeah.
And sadly, it has been something that's really haunted me, I guess would be one way of putting it, that I could not stay in the industry because I loved the industry so much and I just missed talking about video games on a daily basis as part of my job. And so years later, I see this YouTube thing, but I didn't have the tech. Uploading anything would have taken forever. I didn't have digital equipment. I'd never stood in front of a camera and talked in front of a mic before.
Sure.
So it was something that I wanted to do, but I just was too scared to get into it. But then one day in 2016, I just went, screw it. I'm doing it. I'm just going to do it. So I grabbed a Disney Sing It mic.
No, get out of here.
It was a USB mic, the only USB mic I had.
Yeah.
I grabbed my then webcam, not webcam, my Panasonic camera, and I just and I had it was a capture card that was designed to move VHS tapes over to computer, and
Yep.
I worked out how to just plug in a system and make it copy whatever's on the screen onto the computer.
Okay.
And I just went for it. And my first video, it's so bad. But you can see the basics of what I was trying to do were there. It was just I didn't know how to match audio up, and I didn't know how to segue, and I just didn't know lighting. I had no lighting. I just had the bulbs in my house, and that's it.
Yeah.
And it's like if you compare what I first worked with in 2016 to what I've got now, it's night and day difference.
Yeah, I mean it's really cool. It's even just some of the Twitter stuff I've seen. You can definitely tell there's a lot of care and time put into it. Your animations are great. Your intros are good. It has a very polished feel to it, and that comes with a lot of hard work and experience. That is stuff I don't know how to do. I can do this. This isn't the extent of my abilities. So I always respect that. I love the fact that it's got that polish to it. It's really cool. Thanks again to Brian for taking the time a few weeks ago to sit with me for 2 hours and just talk about games and Sega and his experiences. And he's got a unique perspective. He's a unique guy. And again, his time is greatly appreciated. And you'll be hearing from him more on future episodes of this very show. And thank you for listening to this very show. Without you, this would be extremely boring. With you, it makes it very fulfilling. So I greatly appreciate your listenership. All right, I'm going to go with that. Thank you for your listenership. If you enjoy this show and want more, there's a whole bunch more. We have 18 other episodes hanging out there somewhere on the internet that you can easily access. So do so by searching A Gamer Looks at 40, primarily on Twitter. But if you can find the show wherever you get your favorite podcasts. And if you want to help out the show, please leave a rating and a review on Apple Podcasts. That will help greatly in getting the show more exposure. Thanks again for listening, and continue being awesome.